This is Shlomo Swidler, CEO of Orchestratus, on Wednesday, October 16th, 2013. Hello, this is Shlomo Swidler, CEO of Orchestratus. Welcome to this episode of the OpenStack Israel podcast. On today's episode, we have two special guests from Gigaspaces. Uri Cohen is the head of product, and Yaron Parasol is the lead product manager for their product Cloudify. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, pleasure being here.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Shlomo.
So, Uri, let's hear your voice so we know who you are.
That's me.
And Yaron.
Hi, Shlomo.
Gigaspaces has been offering solutions for software developers who are deploying their products in large operational environments, in complex virtualization and cloud environments for quite some time. When did you start looking at OpenStack as something that's interesting in this space?
I think it happened probably about 3 years ago. At the time, there were two kind of main contenders for the open cloud operating system. There was cloud.com, which is now CloudStack, and then OpenStack. A few others, of course, but it seemed like OpenStack is going to get a lot of traction. We just didn't realize how much traction then, but we decided that OpenStack is going to be something that we're going to keep an eye on and integrate our products with in the future.
Why is OpenStack interesting for you?
Our product, Cloudify, which is essentially an open source application deployment and management platform, is mainly targeted at private clouds, at organizations that are trying to push as many applications and as many services to their private cloud environment. So it was really natural. I mean, it seemed at the time OpenStack would actually be very dominant in the private cloud space. Most of our users and prospects that were thinking about implementing their own private cloud, OpenStack was definitely a main candidate as technology to do that. So we figured that, in light of this kind of alignment between what we're trying to sell and to whom we're trying to sell and what they're looking for, the infrastructure there, it would just make sense to support OpenStack within Cloudify.
Companies produce products and platforms and frameworks because something that their clientele is trying to do is difficult or complicated or error-prone. What about deploying applications on cloud resources? What is complicated? Why is that difficult?
If you're looking at what enterprise organizations are trying to achieve, they're trying to take a lot of their workload into a private cloud because public cloud is a regulatory problem for them. So they have a lot of applications that are built for years, but none of them was built for the cloud. And even more than that, putting an application in an automated fashion to production and then keeping it in production is not something that is that simple. You can look at it as a kind of a three-layer cake with the cloud infrastructure on the bottom layer, then there's the middleware, and then there's the application, but all the layers needs to be interconnected. There's a lot of configurations that are being influenced between different components across the different three layers. Doing that with so many different technologies and then keeping it alive, monitoring, scaling, and other things that you need to do with the production environment, and hopefully in an automated fashion, it takes quite a lot of complexity to achieve this, and the tools are still lacking something, and we aim to fill this gap.
And these are problems that exist for public cloud consumers as well.
Yes, it's not specific to OpenStack by any means. So it's when it comes to managing applications on these environments, there's a range of possibilities depending on what type of applications you're pushing, how critical they are to your business, what level of control you want over the infrastructure, and so on. And Amazon, actually, their product portfolio really shows all the range of possibilities that you have here, starting from platform as a service, which is kind of the most simple, yet the option with the least control. And then going through solutions like CloudFormation, which is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, just handle the infrastructure part of things and automate that to some extent. And more recently, they've come out with OpsWorks, which is essentially a way to retrofit or to take your existing assets around automation, such as chef cookbooks and recipes, and add another layer on top of them, which does all the orchestration, both the infrastructure and the configuration management.
Sounds like we need something like that for OpenStack.
Exactly our thoughts. Cloudify itself aims to provide that to other cloud environments. We do support other clouds besides OpenStack, but our focus is mainly around OpenStack. So most of the infrastructure support, for example, that we implement, for example, when you're creating a multi-tier application, you will have to create one or more networks for that application. You will have to define a few security groups to each of the components in your application. You will have to configure the load balancing in front of it. You will have to configure some sort of storage for it, whether it's block or blob storage. But there are a lot of aspects you will need to do when you go about and set up your application and automate its deployment. So what we're doing is we're going with an OpenStack first approach. So we have kind of an abstraction layer within the product that actually can be implemented for other clouds. But what we're doing is we're internally aiming for OpenStack as a primary platform, and all these capabilities that we're supporting, we're implementing them first on OpenStack.
So you're taking your product, Cloudify, and using it to implement something that's similar to Amazon Web Services OpsWorks.
Yeah, exactly. That will be a first statement. One key difference is the way we deliver this product to the market. Whereas OpsWorks is a service that you consume from Amazon, Cloudify is an open source software platform that you download and set up in the cloud environment of your choice.
So would that mean that using your solution, I would be able to, from a single control panel, orchestrate resources inside OpenStack in conjunction with Amazon-hosted resources across several clouds?
That's definitely one of the goals, to achieve a hybrid and multi-cloud deployment, because enterprise often need a DR site, and they need also to take their business to where it most applies from a regulation standpoint or from price standpoint. So of course we have to provide something that is multi-cloud in nature. But even before talking about a multi-cloud deployment, when you look at OpsWorks, it still gives you hooks into some kind of a built-in process. We believe it should be taken to the next phase where you actually design the process or the processes. So orchestration is what we identify as the most missing piece. And orchestration for us means not just the ability to touch on all of the layers that I mentioned before, but also designing the process, the flow, how things are being synchronized together so you achieve the desired result and not just a very simplistic mechanism, kind of mechanic process.
So it sounds like this is directed at making OpenStack more application friendly.
Yes, that will be first statement. When you look at businesses in general, it's not about the infrastructure really, it's about what kind of services you can provide to your customers, which are implemented by application.
Shouldn't this be a key part of the OpenStack project?
That's a great question. OpenStack was created as an infrastructure as a service project. There is at least one project. It's not something that is not identified by other members of the community, so it's definitely something people are talking about. There are a few projects that tackle this issue from various angles. The most dominant one would be probably Heat. So Heat is actually now a built-in project in the OpenStack distribution since Grizzly. Essentially, the original intention of that project was to implement a cloud formation-like service a la AWS on top of OpenStack with the same syntax and the same services. So it's very, very similar to CloudFormation, and allow OpenStack users to automate some of their infrastructure concerns or the creation of infrastructure resources like network, like compute resources, like storage, and so on. And we're seeing a lot of discussions within and taking part in a lot of discussions within the community around what the next level should be. So within the Heat project itself, there are voices that are calling for the project to go up the stack and handle more than just infrastructure resources. There are other projects on StackForge, for example, which try to tackle some of these concerns. Yaron mentioned orchestration, so there are at least one project around workflow in StackForge. StackForge, by the way, is the kind of incubator area for OpenStack projects that are not part of the official OpenStack distribution. There are about 80 or 90 projects there already. Definitely the community is discussing that. There have been talks about standards like Tosca, which is probably Yaron remembers what the initial stands for better than me, but Tosca is essentially a standard for describing infrastructure and applications on top of that infrastructure with all the concerns that we mentioned before. That's one standard that's being discussed heavily. There are a few sessions about it in the last summit in Portland, and it's going to be heavily discussed in Hong Kong as well. And by the way, Yaron and I are actually talking about that. We have a talk about that in the first day of the conference.
The Tosca stands for
Topology and orchestration specification for cloud application.
So your efforts with OpenStack, are they specifically aimed at bridging the two technologies, the two implementations of Tosca and the world of AWS OpsWorks?
like I said, OpsWorks has identified the exact need, but I think it addressed it just to a certain extent. Maybe it's just the first release and they're still learning their clientele. We've been engaging with enterprises for the last 2.5 years about taking applications to various clouds, and lately especially into OpenStack. I think we identified several processes, several DevOps processes that needs to be addressed, and therefore we seeked another guideline that take us to the next step. And Tosca, at least in the concepts and the way of thinking, was a perfect match for us. We still find Tosca a little bit cumbersome in the syntax and some of the artifacts, but as a starting point, it was very inspiring for us. We're now building more and more Tosca-like enhancements into our Cloudify product.
Are you going to be contributing Cloudify to OpenStack?
Still under discussion. Cloudify itself is completely open source, it's really more of a kind of a theoretical question. That's something that we're still thinking about. We'll probably have at least parts of it hosted on StackForge to begin with. Probably the parts that are more OpenStack specific. Still remains to be seen whether the product as a whole would move to StackForge. Definitely the direction is have an even tighter integration with OpenStack. For example, some of the things that we're talking about are integrating not just with the infrastructure parts of OpenStack, so for example Neutron for networking and Cinder for storage and so on, but also working on things using the OpenStack way. So for example, integrating with Ceilometer, which is the monitoring and metering component of OpenStack. So Cloudify manages applications, and it needs to monitor those applications and take decisions based on the monitored metrics. So when you will run an OpenStack, you will be able to use Ceilometer to push metrics into Cloudify, and have Cloudify take decisions based on that.
What kind of activities does an orchestration environment need to deliver on top of the raw infrastructure?
It's a set of many tasks that you need to perform on different layers. So for example, you need to create a network, then you need to put in the machines, then you need to install the different middleware components, and then you need to put the application artifacts and wire them. That's just the installation. Then you have other processes like auto-heal, monitoring, scale, and of course continuous deployment, which is probably the most complex one. The orchestration is not about executing these tasks, but about timing them, about getting feedback from monitoring probes, about setting policies to analyze these monitoring probes and realize what needs to be done next. It's more like the glue layer that has the algorithm of timing and synchronizing the different parts, about passing information and sharing information, metadata, especially between the different parts, and policies to automate some additional processes on a need basis.
So it's building the scaffolding on top of the infrastructure upon which the application will sit.
That's the what we call the deployment automation piece. But it's also doing more intimate things to the application, like continuous deployment, continuous delivery. So, for example, if you have an application that runs on top of Ruby on Rails, you want to update the sources for that application. You want to do it in a way, if you're hosting an online service, you want to do it in a way that will not take down the application. And you want to be able to do it reliably, even multiple times a day. So there are procedures and processes to do it properly. For example, trigger things from within your build server. So every time you push code, the build server compiles that code, and if certain tests pass, it will actually push that code to production. Then when you push that code, how you do that, whether you do it all at once, which is probably not a good idea, or use strategies like a canary instance, what we call a canary instance. So it's essentially one instance that you push the new code onto, see how it behaves in production. If that goes well, push it to the rest of the instances, or push it to part of the instances, or just even part of the users. So there are a lot of strategies you can implement that, and that's part of the workflow. That's part of the orchestration piece that needs to take place for these processes to be automated.
Why should an enterprise or a smaller company who's considering a private cloud, why should they specifically look at OpenStack and the OpenStack ecosystem as opposed to the alternatives?
So it's about the traction around the project and companies that are backing that.
Is that why you chose and still continue to choose to invest in this ecosystem? Because of the ecosystem?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. So you can see that, as far as the OpenStack Foundation itself, in terms of funding and the companies that are behind it, it's way ahead of any other open source cloud technology out there.
So how do you find working with the community? Is there a lot of activity? Are you seeing support for new ideas? Is it open?
Yes, I would say it's fairly open. There are a few rules that are quite strict that you have to follow. If you want to be listened to, you have to gain your own credibility. You just can't come out of the blue and do whatever you want. Even if you push code that solves a few bugs or changes things, you have to have a reputation, and you have to have someone that knows you or recognizes your reputation for that code to even be considered. So while the community is pretty open, it takes a bit of investment and effort to make your way into the community and to be able to contribute and to claim your stake, so to speak.
What is your end vision here? Is your end vision here with Cloudify and its use of OpenStack, is it to create a clone of AWS OpsWorks?
We're aiming to take it much beyond that. I don't know what Werner Vogel's plans. I'm sure he has some very smart ideas, and he has a lot of customers to talk with and realize where he needs to take his products. So I'm sure they're going to set a way, and probably we would watch, and I don't know if we'll follow, but we'll definitely watch very closely. However, I think we already understand where our enterprise customers wants to be, and we're in continuous dialogue with them. And I think, like Uri mentioned before, we want to take it into the full application lifecycle, and therefore it takes much beyond what OpsWorks has to offer now. Also, OpsWorks kind of focus on a specific tool on Chef. We understand that there's a wider choice of tools out there and a lot of investment already in some existing tools, and we would like to keep ourselves open to any kind of tool that needs to be orchestrated. So in terms of monitoring, in terms of execution, in terms of almost anything during the application lifecycle management, we would like you to have a free choice of tool and even combine tools in a very easy fashion. So we would be friendly to both Chef and Puppet, for example, and to many different monitoring tools. So in that sense, we're also different from OpsWorks. I think also our GUI goes much beyond OpsWorks. I don't know why they chose to have kind of a limited UI, but maybe they're going to extend that. I think Cloudify is going to be the major dashboard that you want to look at when you want to understand what's happening with your application on the cloud.
Yeah, on a more general note, I would say that our aim is for anyone that's considering to manage and run applications on OpenStack. We want them to be aware of Cloudify and hopefully use it as well.
Would you recommend to application developers and deployers to look at Tosca?
Yeah, I think I would. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to use it as is. Like Yaron mentioned, there are a few powerful concepts there, but in some cases it becomes too detailed or too cumbersome. But definitely it's very comprehensive, and it accounts for almost all the concerns you can think of when managing applications. If you're an architect and you want to think about kind of what it is you have to do to manage an application, looking at a specification like Tosca can be a very good guide to that.
Tosca and CAMP, which is another standard, they don't have an underlying implementation. There's no reference implementation. It's just a pure standard. So Tosca, for example, gives you a free choice of a workflow engine. They don't even have any kind of reference implementation with a specific workflow engine. So if anyone from our audience or people who want to take an application to OpenStack wants to implement Tosca, and they're going to have a great deal of integration of components, building such tool. And I think that's exactly what's happening with the largest cloud players like Netflix, Etsy, Facebook, etc. They have to build their own system because there's nothing out there for them. And I guess they build something that is similar to what we are planning to achieve with Cloudify. If you have a large cloud operation, you definitely need orchestration. And if you can afford building your own, you're probably doing that already. But we hope that there will be many more companies that will benefit from Cloudify. Basically, the entire community can benefit from Cloudify because we're going to allow people to use something like Tosca, but without building it from scratch.
You'll be attending the OpenStack Israel Summit here in Israel on December 9th. What are your expectations from that event?
Looking at, in retrospect, previous events, it kind of follows the trend of the worldwide OpenStack events. So we started off very modestly. I think the first event had less than 100 people, maybe 50 or 60 or something like that. And the latest one, which I think was in November or December, if I'm not wrong, was already almost 500 people, which is quite impressive. So at least from my perspective, I'm expecting that number to grow. And I'm also expecting to see more real-life use cases for OpenStack. There were a few very interesting use cases last time, from LivePerson, for example. I would like to see more people that are using that, and as I'm sure there are. Essentially, just grow the community here in Israel.
Yaron?
So my expectations are quite similar to Uri's. I think it's very exciting to see even kind of mid-range or even small in global terms companies in Israel being very innovative with their cloud usage. And especially OpenStack is meeting such advanced users is always a pleasure and a great source to learn from. So definitely that's my expectation, to meet new Israeli OpenStack users. And of course, learn about where the next versions are going to. We also have some vendors here in Israel that actually develop plugins and part of the core projects of OpenStack. So it's also exciting to be here in the OpenStack Summit.
Yaron and Uri, thank you very much for your time, for joining me on the OpenStack Israel podcast. In order to learn more about OpenStack Israel and the event coming up on December 9th, check out the website at www.openstack-israel.org. And again, Uri and Yaron, thank you.
Thank you very much, Shlomo, for hosting us here.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.